The US aircraft carrier Carl Vinson was not heading towards Korea, despite earlier reports to the contrary. Donald Trump told Fox News the US was sending an armada. It wasn't, not yet anyway. But what does happen next in the fraught and obstreperous relationship between North Korea and the USA? China, caught in the middle, committed to North Korea for the simple reason that it isn't South Korea with its US military bases and its roughly 30,000 US troops. Dr. Robert E. Kelly is Associate Professor of International Relations at Pusan National University in South Korea. And yes, he is the man whose children popped up in the back of his Skype cross so famously with the BBC. He says there's not a single person in his position anywhere who believes an airstrike on North Korea is the right thing to do. Why? Well, you have to understand what North Korea wants. In short, Kim Jong-un has absolute power and he wants to keep it.
I think there's a consensus in the analyst community that North Korea wants regime survival more than anything else. Unification, North Korea probably could not unify Korea on its own. It would be very difficult to digest South Korea. I don't actually think North Korea has offensive intentions anymore. I think the nuclear weapons are primarily designed to prevent American-led regime change, like happened in Libya or Iraq. I don't actually believe that the North Koreans want to attack anyone. I think what they really want is just to be left alone so that the regime elite can survive and enjoy the sort of cushy lifestyle that they have now, right? They're sort of terrible human rights violators and stuff. We all know that. And they're worried about unification because they could wind up in front of the International Criminal Court or something like that.
So no one thinks that a US-led airstrike is an appropriate response to what's going on?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why this is the case. I mean, I think there's sort of a moral case, you could argue, that South Korea and the United States could hit back at North Korea for its various provocations over the years. But South Korea is uniquely vulnerable to North Korea. If the North Koreans should choose to escalate, South Korea's capital begins just 30 miles from the North Korean border, which makes it very difficult for South Korea to hit back because it's then vulnerable to counterfire. North Korea has buried its assets underground. It's been tunneling for decades since the American air campaign in the First Korean War, which means any American air campaign against North Korea today would take days, if not weeks. It would look a lot more like a war and a lot less like a surgical strike than in Syria. North Korea has an alliance with China. If the Americans were actually bombing North Korea for weeks, the North Koreans would be calling on China for help. The North Koreans also start to move their own citizens around potential targets. You'd have human shields in North Korea after the bombs fell. After the first 24 hours, you'd have human shields, possible Chinese intervention. The risks are huge, right? And so even the hawks out there in the analyst community, and I would consider myself a mild hawk on North Korea, even the hawks out there think bombing North Korea would be a terrible mistake. And this is why we've never done it before. I mean, North Korea has provoked the U.S. and South Korea for decades, and we've never used major kinetic action against them because the costs, the risks are just so high.
Right, so Mike Pence saying the era of strategic patience is over. What does he mean by that?
Right, so strategic patience was sort of this Obama term that kind of emerged informally to suggest that we were going to wait for North Korea to come around and instead talk to China because dealing directly with North Korea led nowhere because they cheated on every deal we struck. I agree with the idea that talking to North Korea is actually something of a fool's errand. I don't actually think the North Koreans stick their deals. This is sort of up for debate, obviously. But the alternative to strategic patience, I suppose, sort of the hawkish alternative to strategic patience would be bombing. I suppose the more dovish alternative would be talking. I don't think the Trump people mean they want to start talking to North Korea. I think what they meant is they want to pursue harder measures, but there are a lot of reasons why harder measures against North Korea are difficult. So Vice President Pence said that strategic patience is over, but I would argue, in fact, that it is not. And I've actually written this several times, that strategic patience is just like a modern way of saying what we've been doing with North Korea for decades, which is containment and deterrence, contain them where they are, prevent them from attacking other people as much as possible, deter their offensive capabilities or nuclear weapons and so on, and then wait. I'm not really sure if there's a good alternative that doesn't risk major war to that outcome, to that method.
You say wait. What are we waiting for? Because the chance of insurgency from within, the chance of the regime being overthrown from within is nil, isn't it? So what are we waiting for? How does this situation end peacefully and satisfactorily?
Right. I agree with you. The likelihood of an insurgency is very low. North Korea is now almost 70 years old, 72 years old, and there's never been a revolt from within. Not ever. There's never been anything like Arab Spring. I think instead what we need to do is focus on getting China to cut off North Korea. North Korea has a lot of trouble. Economically, it's not self-sustaining, not particularly well. It's getting better than it was before. But North Korea needs a pipeline to the rest of the world. That's where the regime elites get their luxury goods. That's where the nuclear technology that has helped the programs get off the ground has come through places like Malaysia, for example. We all learned about that when Kim Jong-nam was murdered in the Malaysian airport. So what we need to do then is to sort of stop the flow of resources into North Korea, and that would provoke an internal, I would argue, that would provoke an internal factional fight over declining resources a shrinking budgetary pie if the resources from outside were not coming in. Most of those resources come through China. And I think the Trump people basically accept this, because if you listen to what the president's been saying, he's been saying we have to push China to sort of cut off North Korea, right? So if you can cut that Chinese umbilical, you can sort of push North Korea towards crisis without, the risks of a bombing campaign. So that's what I would argue. But that's gonna take like 5 or 10 years. There's no easy, imminent solution, right? You can't just send in the aircraft carriers. That's just not going to work here.
Dr. Robert Kelly talking to us earlier this afternoon.